Before the Fellowship was the greatest story you've never heard. I'm Greg.
I'm Cameron.
I'm Dan.
Join us as we read and react to the Silmarillion by J.R.R. Tolkien. Last time, we began chapter 20. Beren and Luthien returned to Doriath. Luthien healed the winter of Thingol. Melian was unable to bear to look upon Luthien, knowing that they were to be separated by death. Beren and Luthien traveled into Osirian and bore a son, Dior Ardanel, the heir to Thingol. Maedhhros attempted to rally the Eldar against Morgoth, but mistrust kept them divided. The sons of Fëanor demanded Thingol return the Silmaril, but he refused. Maedhhros gathered willing soldiers from Nargothrond and from among men and dwarves. On the day of their assault, Maedhros' plans were frustrated by the betrayal of a man called Uldor. Fingon began to despair until Turgon and his army arrived from Gondolin. Morgoth used his cunning and deceit to keep the various armies of the Eldar separated. His captain approached Fingon and brought a prisoner from Angband. He decapitated the prisoner and threatened to kill more prisoners in an attempt to draw Fingon's forces to Angband. Today, we continue chapter 20, beginning on page 191 of the second edition. By ill chance, at that place in the outworks stood Gwyndor of Nargothrond, the brother of Gelmir. Now his wrath was kindled to madness, and he leapt forth on horseback, and many riders with him. And they pursued the heralds and slew them, and drove on deep into the main host. And seeing this, all the host of the Noldor was set on fire, and Fingon put on his white helm and sounded his trumpets, and all the host of Hithlum leapt forth from the hills in sudden onslaught. The light of the drawing of the swords of the Noldor was like a fire in a field of reeds. And so fell and swift was their onset, that almost the designs of Morgoth went astray. Before the army that he sent westward could be strengthened, it was swept away, and the banners of Fingon passed over Anfaglyth, and were raised before the walls of Angband. Ever in the forefront of that battle went Gwyndor and the elves of Nargothrond, and even now they could not be restrained, and they burst through the gate and slew the guards upon the very stairs of Angband. And Morgoth trembled upon his deep throne, hearing them beat upon his doors. But they were trapped there, and all were slain, save Gwyndor only, whom they took alive. For Fingon could not come to their aid. By many secret doors in Thangordrim, Morgoth had let issue forth his main host that he held in waiting, and Fingon was beaten back with great loss from the walls. Then, in the plain of Anfaglyth, on the fourth day of the war, there began Nirnaeth Arnoediad, the unnumbered tears, for no song or tale can contain all its grief. The host of Fingon retreated over the sands, and Haldir, lord of the Haladin, was slain in the rear guard. With him fell most of the men of Brethil, and came never back to their woods. But on the fifth day, as night fell, and they were still far from arid Wetherin, the orcs surrounded the host of Hithlum, and they fought until day pressed ever closer. In the morning came hope, when the horns of Turgon were heard as he marched up with the main host of Gondolin. For they had been stationed southward, guarding the pass of Sirion, and Turgon restrained most of his people from the rash onslaught. Now he hastened to the aid of his brother, and the Gondolin Dream were strong and clad in mail, and their ranks shone like a river of steel in the sun. Now the phalanx of the guard of the king broke through the ranks of the orcs, and Turgon hewed his way to the side of his brother. And it is told that the meeting of Turgon with Húrin, who stood beside Fingon, was glad in the midst of battle. Then hope was renewed in the hearts of the elves, and in that very time, at the third hour of morning, the trumpets of Maedhhros were heard, at last coming up from the east. and the banners of the sons of Fëanor assailed the enemy in the rear. Some have said that even then, the Eldar might have won the day had all their hosts proved faithful, for the orcs wavered, and their onslaught was stayed, and already some were turning to flight. But even as the vanguard of Maedhhros came upon the orcs, Morgoth loosed his last strength, and Angband was emptied. There came wolves and wolf riders, and there came Balrogs and dragons, and Glaurung, father of dragons. The strength and terror of the great worm were now great indeed, and elves and men withered before him. And he came between the hosts of Maedhhros and Fingon, and swept them apart. Yet neither by wolf, nor by Balrog, nor by dragon would Morgoth have achieved his end, but for the treachery of men. In this hour, the plots of Ulfang were revealed. Many of the Easterlings turned and fled, their hearts being filled with lies and fear. But the sons of Ulfang went over suddenly to Morgoth and drove in upon the rear of the sons of Fëanor. And in the confusion that they wrought, they came near to the standard of Maedhhros. They reaped not the reward that Morgoth promised them, for Maglor slew Uldor, the accursed, the leader in treason, and the sons of Bor slew Ulfast and Ulwarth, ere they themselves were slain. But new strength of evil men came up that Uldor had summoned and kept hidden in the eastern hills. And the host of Maedhhros was assailed now on 3 sides, and it broke and was scattered, and fled this way and that. Yet fate saved the sons of Fëanor, and though all were wounded, none were slain. For they drew together, and gathering a remnant of the Noldor and the Naugrim about them, they hewed a way out of the battle and escaped far away towards Mount Dolmed in the east. Last of all, the eastern force to stand firm were the Dwarves of Belegost, and thus they won renown. For the Naugrim withstood fire more heartily than either elves or men, and it was their custom, moreover, to wear great masks in battle, hideous to look upon, and those stood them in good stead against the dragons. And but for them, Glaurung and his brood would have withered all that was left of the Noldor. But the Naugrim made a circle about him when he assailed them, and even his mighty armor was not foolproof against the blows of their great axes. And when in his rage Glaurung turned and struck down Azaghâl, lord of Belegost, and crawled over him, with his last stroke Azaghâl drove a knife into his belly, and so wounded him that he fled the field, and the beasts of Angband in dismay followed after him. Then the dwarves raised up the body of Azaghâl and bore it away, and with slow steps they walked behind, singing a dirge in deep voices, as it were a funeral pomp in their country, and gave no heed more to their foes, and none dared to stay them. But now in the western battle, Fingon and Turgon were assailed by a tide of foes thrice greater than all the force that was left to them. Gothmog, lord of Balrogs, high captain of Angband, was come, and he drove a dark wedge between the elven hosts, surrounded King Fingon, and thrusting Turgon and Húrin aside towards the fen of Sarek. Then he turned upon Fingon. That was a grim meeting. At last, Fingon stood alone with his guard dead about him, and he fought with Gothmog, until another Balrog came behind and cast a thong of fire about him. Then Gothmog hewed him with his black axe, and a white flame sprang upon from the helm of Fingon as it was cloven. Thus fell the high king of the Noldor, and they beat him into the dust with their maces, and his banner, blue and silver, they trod into the mire of his blood. The field was lost, but still Hurin and Huor and the remnant of the house of Hador stood firm with Turgon of Gondolin, and the hosts of Morgoth could not yet win the pass of Sirion. Then Hurin spoke to Turgon, saying, "Go now, Lord, while time is, for in you lives the last hope of the Eldar, and while Gondolin stands, Morgoth shall still know fear in his heart." But Turgon answered, "Not long now can Gondolin be hidden, and being discovered, it must fall." Then Huor spoke and said, "Yet if it stands but a little while, then out of your house shall come the hope of the elves and men. This I say to you, Lord, with the eyes of death, though we part here forever, and I shall not look on your white walls again, from you and from me a new star shall arise. Farewell." And Maeglin, Turgon's sister son, who stood by, heard these words and did not forget them, but he said nothing. Then Turgon took the counsel of Hurin and Huor, and summoning all that remained of the host of Gondolin, and such of Fingon's people as could be gathered, he retreated towards the pass of Sirion, and his captains, Ecthelion and Glorfindel, guarded the flanks to right and left, so that none of the enemy should pass them by. But the men of Dorlomin held the rear guard, as Hurin and Huor desired, for they did not wish in their hearts to leave the Northlands. And if they could not win back to their homes, there they would stand to the end. Thus was the treachery of Uldor redressed, and of all the deeds of war that the fathers of men wrought in behalf of the Eldar, the last stand of the men of Dorlomin is most renowned. So it was that Turgon fought his way southward, until coming behind the guard of Hurin and Huor, he passed down Sirion and escaped. And he vanished into the mountains, and was hidden from the eyes of Morgoth. But the brothers drew the remnant of the men of the house of Hador about them, and foot by foot they withdrew until they came behind the fen of Serek, and had the stream of Rivil before them. There they stood, and gave way no more. Then all the hosts of Angband swarmed against them, and they bridged the stream with their dead, and encircled the remnant of Hithlim, as a gathering tide about a rock. There, as the sun westered on the 6th day, and the shadow of Eredwethrin grew dark, Huor fell pierced with the venomed arrow in his eye, and all the valiant men of Hador were slain about him in a heap, and the orcs hewed their heads and piled them as a mound of gold in the sunset. Last of all, Hurin stood alone. Then he cast aside his shield and wielded an axe two-handed. And it is sung that the axe smoked in the black blood of the troll guard of Gothmog until it withered. And each time he slew, Hurin cried, "Aude, Entuluva, day shall come again." 70 times he uttered that cry, but they took him at last alive by the command of Morgoth, for the orcs grappled him with their hands, which clung to him still, though he hewed off their arms, and ever their numbers were renewed, until at last he fell, buried beneath them. Then Gothmog bound him and dragged him to Angband with mockery. Thus ended Nirnaeth Arnoediad, as the sun went down beyond the sea. Night fell in Hithlim, and there came a great storm of wind out of the west. In summary, the enraged Eldar furiously pursue Morgoth's forces to the very gates of Angband. Gwyndor and the elves of Nargothrond burst into Angband, but become trapped there, and only Gwyndor escapes. Fingon is beaten back to the plain of Anfaglith, But Turgon and Maedhhros eventually arrive, and hope is rekindled. Morgoth unleashes his full strength on them. Then Ulfang carries out his treacherous plan and attacks Maedhhros from the rear. His forces are scattered, and the sons of Fëanor are forced to retreat. Azaghâl, Lord of Belegost, and the Dwarves hold back Glaurung the dragon heroically. Azaghâl is defeated, but he badly wounds the dragon, and the beasts of Angband retreat. Gothmog, Lord of Balrogs, and a great army fight against Fingon and Turgon in the west. Fingon faces Gothmog alone and is slain. Huor, Húrin, and the House of Hador fight off the onslaught of Morgoth to give time for Turgon to retreat back to Gondolin. Húrin alone remains, and he is taken alive to Angband. Yeah, this is it's getting ugly now in the story. This is such a change of pace from Beren and Luthien. That one was like an adventure of the two of them, or the three of them, with our guy Juan. But it was kind of like that small adventure, and this is just like the ugliness of war and these heroes being slain and all of that.
Is this the first time we hear about Ulfang and Ulf son and Ulf daddy? Uldor and Ulfang? Is this the first time?
Yeah, I think it's just this chapter. The last reading they were mentioned as like people who were
the faithless men from the east.
Yeah.
I mean, we've heard reference to them before, right?
Right.
Yeah, I wonder what their death count is so far in this book. It's a lot of death.
Yeah.
I mean, right here, there was just striking amounts of really savage death.
Oh, so in 157, way back here, it says that Morgoth was well content, for this was as he had designed. The friendship between the new-come men, so the Easterlings, and the Noldor. So he had plotted this from like way back then. I mean, this is from chapters ago, that he plotted the friendship with Ulfang, who proved to be unfaithful.
Mm-hmm.
And because right earlier in 192, which was in this reading, it says, yet neither by wolf, nor by Balrog, nor by dragon would Morgoth have achieved his end, but for the treachery of men. So it was like just faithless men.
Right.
That was the
that's what
Achilles
decided
heel.
This. This is kind of funny for kind of a somber reading, but this is all kind of like a history that's being recounted, right? And Tolkien seems to make these little notes like nobody knows exactly what happened, but this is what has been passed down. Those
like
kinds
Tolkien
of things.
has asked
right?
all his friends, like, do you guys know what happened?
And this is one of my favorite ones.
On Ardia, Dad?
Yeah.
They're like, no, what are you talking about? No one knows.
Yeah. No one survived. How can we know? Everyone, they were all lost. But I love this part here. This is towards the bottom of 192. It says that hope was rekindled when Turgon shows up, right? Like Fingon's by himself and he's kind of despairing, and Turgon shows up, and then they hear the trumpets of Maedhhros, and they're like, okay, we're all here. We're gonna fight. We have renewed hope. And it says here, some have said that even then the Eldar might have won the day had all their hosts proved faithful.
Mm-hmm.
And what that reminds me of is like, as a sports fan or playing board games or something, when you lose, but you can like see why you lost, and you're like, oh, just that one thing was different.
You watch the tape. Yeah.
If that one thing, if that role was different, or if that, this whole thing would have played out differently. If the Astros hadn't cheated in the 2017 World Series, the Dodgers would have won. It's like that hindsight, like lamenting.
Yeah.
And it makes you think even the elves would do that kind of thing as they look back on these battles. Like they're recounting these horrendous battles, these terrible defeats.
Can you imagine how they would pass the story down? Because they they fought Morgoth all the way to his gates, and like Morgoth was shaking in his boots.
Yeah.
The orcs were like being slaughtered on the doorstep, and if it wasn't for this guy named Ulfang, like we would have had the victory, because that was like the critical moment of treachery. Because he just leaves, right? But was it Uldor who had the assault from behind?
Some of the men. No, Uldor also is part of it.
I think Ulfang just left.
Wait.
I think Ulfang was part of it.
Oh, many of the Easterlings turned and fled, their hearts being filled with lies and fear. But the sons of Ulfang went over suddenly to Morgoth and drove in upon the rear of the sons of Fëanor.
Yeah, they just turned on Fëanor.
On Maedhhros.
Oh, yeah.
The sons of Fëanor.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, sorry.
So they came, so they like attacked from the rear.
Now, what is it about the names Ulfor and Ulfang and Uldor that you know they're bad? It's that like Tolkien just gets language. I don't know if we just are projecting that because we know they're bad, but just the name.
I mean, they're sort of. I mean, fangs are sharp and in monsters, and
nothing wrong with that.
Fasting sucks, and Ulder sounds like Oda.
No, it sounds like a door, like an old door.
Oda.
We love,
sounds like
you
Oda.
love old doors. I still get Fingon and Turgon mixed up. And I'm sorry to say that. I'm sorry, guys. We're like 2/3 of the way through the book. I'm sorry.
They're brothers. Fingon is now the king of Nargothrond.
And Turgon's the hidden king.
In Gondolin. In Gondolin.
Gotcha.
And Fingon's also one that rescued Maedhhros. That's why they're buds. They've been buds forever.
Fingon and Maedhhros, right?
He's the one that saved him when he was captured.
Right.
So back to our ranking of the deaths of the Noldor kings. This is up there. He just fought Gothmog by himself.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. And he gets his basically. It sounds like. I mean, he goes through his helm. It's cloven. Sounds like he basically got split.
Yeah.
But that was only because another Balrog came up behind him.
Yeah.
So he was fighting Gothmog like one-on-one and doing a pretty good job.
Right.
But
we have we're given another
doesn't
possible...
have a whip, he has an axe, which is like savage. It's pretty savage.
We're given another potential Tolkien-based band name.
Yeah.
Thong of Fire.
Yeah, Fire Thong. Yeah. Thong of Fire. Yeah, we could sing a lot of songs.
I do love though that like some of the, it seems like often when Sauron fights somebody, or more like Fingolfin fought Morgoth himself, didn't he? With his when he brought out Grond, his mace. And he wanted to just like defile his body, but he was saved by the eagle.
The round door.
Yeah.
But this one, there was no saving him. Like they just beat his body into dust, and his banner, they trod into the mire of his blood. Like he did not get, which I kind of like that about him. I like that he just like fought brutally to the end, and there's nothing left to show of him. He went out like a boss.
So which Ecthelion, which one is this? Because that's not the one that's referred to in the Lord of the Rings. It's not the one that Boromir and
the index says Elf Lord of Gondolin.
Okay. So it's a different one.
Yeah, I think so. And then
Okay, yeah.
Now that we're on the note of deaths, Hurin's capture. So he's fighting off. I love this line Array and Tuluva. Day shall come again.
Yeah.
How he says it 70 times as he's killing orcs. Day shall come again, just that heroic hope. And then it describes that the orcs are grappling him with their hands and he's hewing off their arms.
Yeah.
So he's just getting covered in all these orc arms that have been hewed off until he is just buried beneath them.
It echoes that war cry from last time. Still, this chapter, I think. I think it's Turgon, page 190, who also cries something out in Elvish, but this time it means the day has come. Behold,
the day has come.
The people
then,
of the Eldar and fathers of men. The day has come, which is, and they answer the night. The night is passing. But then now it's like the night is actually only beginning, but there's still that message of hope. Day shall come again.
Well, that's an interesting insight because what Huron's crying is day shall come again, which means that the night has fallen.
Yeah.
That's so interesting.
Like they were convinced that they could defeat Morgoth. And probably, I mean, they could, but they didn't calculate treachery, or how did they put it? The treachery of men.
Right. I have a question.
What is it?
When Huor spoke to Turgon, and he says that we will part here forever, is he saying he'll never see him again?
This I say to you, Lord, with the eyes of death. Does that mean he's dying? Though we part here forever, ever. So is he just saying, I'm dying, sorry, bye?
So what do the elves and men know about what comes after death in their mythology? Isn't there something about how there's like an unwritten theme that no one knows about?
Well, we heard about this a little bit at the end of Beren and Luthien, where when Beren died, he went to the halls of Maedhhros, but men apparently just passed through there into like whatever afterlife they have. Whereas the Eldar, it seems like they stay there and dwell in the halls of Maedhhros. And so, but it was like Luthien playing with Maedhhros that persuaded him to keep Beren there longer and then eventually return him to life. So there's like the separation, like the men really die and they're gone into oblivion or something.
Yeah, I think with the men, I might be misremembering this, but maybe you guys know, but with the men, it was not revealed to the Noldor what their ultimate fate would be. Like there's more we know about the Noldor's fate, but with the men, it's something that Iluvatar hasn't revealed, right?
Yeah, it's unknown. Because he says, I mean, look, this I say to you with the eyes of death, I'm dying. Though we part here forever, and I shall not look on your white walls again. From you and from me, a new star shall arise. Farewell. So he's talking about the temporal for sure, but he's not close. He's not saying we won't ever see each other again, but he's also not saying we will see each other again. It's like still a big question mark.
Gotcha.
I think he believes he will never see, even in some kind of afterlife, he will never see Turgon again.
I don't know. I think
that's what Melian said too when she, remember it said she could not stand to look upon Luthien.
Oh, because
she knew that death would always separate them.
Yeah, but it's still a temporal.
I don't think so. I think it's more permanent than that.
And doesn't know that Luthien is gonna.
Because why would Luthien?
Well, she
choose mortal life if she's going to be reunited with him.
They're not dying.
Wait, say that again. Sorry, we were talking.
The elves aren't dying,
right?
So of course.
What do you mean they're not dying?
Where's Melian existing? She's existing in the west with the elves, right? or
No,
not?
Melian's in Doriath still with Thingol. It's not, to me, it seems like she's talking more about life and death. Like, and she's a Maya too, so she's
Yeah.
like, she definitely doesn't die. And so wherever death takes men,
Yeah.
she will never go there.
Yeah. Yeah.
But even elves, it seems, can't really go there.
Yeah. But that's because they typically don't die, right? And
But I
when
think
they do
even
die,
the ones
what
that do,
happens?
doesn't it say like Fëanor is in the halls of Mandos? That's not an afterlife. That's a place. We know where that is.
Yeah. Yeah.
And he's after he was slain. He.
Yeah. But I mean, it doesn't mean that they're
Dan,
obliterated.
don't cry.
No, I'm just saying it doesn't mean that they're obliterated.
Oh, I just heard I heard crying. I thought that
There's
was
a
you.
little baby that was like inside of you crying when
Yeah,
you
there
were
is.
losing the argument.
I'm not losing the argument.
Like
My
when you
argument
open your
still
mouth, you heard
stands.
this little cry from deep inside. Like, wah.
My point is that it doesn't mean they're being obliterated. Like they're just.
Oh
it's
yeah,
not-
they're not being annihilated.
Yeah.
But I think my point is they just don't the what happens to men is a mystery.
Yes.
And it's something Iluvatar hasn't revealed to anyone.
And we do know though that it does separate them from the elves and apparently the Maya too. We do know that because of the sorrow. But then again, we don't know, is there an end of time in Arda? And do all things get wrapped up and then there becomes a new creation? We don't know that. We don't know if that's written into Tolkien at this point anyway.
Yeah, right. Yeah. We don't know it all yet. Okay.
Oh, wait. I
mention...
think I found something. I just went to the chapter of men, page 104. Okay. This is important to just read these few sentences. But men were more frail, more easily slain by weapon or mischance, and less easily healed, subject to sickness and many ills, and they grew old and died. What may befall their spirits after death, the elves know not. Some say that they, too, go to the halls of Mandos, but their place of waiting there is not that of the elves, and Mandos under Iluvatar alone, save Manwë, knows whither they go after the time of recollection in those silent halls beside the outer sea.
That's a really cool. I'm amazed that you found that, actually. How did you find that?
Well, I just remember there's a chapter on men, and I assumed it would be towards the end of that chapter. And it's a short chapter, so maybe Manwë guided me.
One thing that I recognize in the stories that we're reading, because again, these are like tales that they tell amongst each other, right? They're these big epics that are passed down. And I feel like we hear this kind of like superlative language all the time. It was the greatest this, or it was the fiercest battle against that. And it's like, they can't all be like the best ever, right? But something that I'm kind of picking up, or maybe I'm reading into it, you tell me, is when the real true moments of heroism are when things are really at the bleakest. So in this case, there was all this treachery from men, and the heroic deeds of Hurin and Huor and the men of Dorlomin are counted among the greatest acts of any men, because it was in this really deep despair, this moment of despair where what really was like the last hope of elves and men was Gondolin. They like held out long enough for them to escape. And so there's something I think that's true about that. Like it was, and it even says the treachery of Uldor was redressed because of this heroic deed. Like there's obviously mistrust between elves and men, but even this worked to heal that. So it says, this is towards the bottom of 194. The last stand of the men of Dorlomin is most renowned. And I think even it's like, from the men's perspective, this was like the story that they passed down. This was like the height of the heroics of men.
Yeah, you're right. He does seem to use those superlatives a lot, but I don't know how many, if any of them, would contradict Like
No,
you're saying.
I'm not
Like,
saying they
maybe
would
this is
necessarily, right? It's
this
like
is in
they'll
regard to
have some
men.
kind of qualifier.
Because
but-
who is the Vala that sings the sad
boy.
songs?
Oh boy.
Oh,
Nienna.
Nienna. Good job. There was something earlier about how she sang, the most beautiful song when she lost the trees, I believe.
Oh, when she sang I Will Follow You Into the Dark.
No, it was My Heart Will Go On.
Oh.
But then when Luthien sings, it mentions like sings before Mondos. It's like no song has been this beautiful. But I wonder in context if they wouldn't contradict. I'm not sure.
No, I think you're right. It's just, to me, it seems like
it's like I want Silmarillion to be inerrant. It can't contradict itself.
it is perspicuous. What does he call it? Totally
perspicuity.
Yeah. So I'm just saying, my point is the heroic acts are greater. Like, even if the deeds are similar in quality, the contrast of like the darkness of despair, the worse the situation they find themselves in, the greater the heroism is portrayed. And things are pretty grim now. I mean, they've already been beaten badly in the previous battle, and like it even said all of the sons of Fëanor were injured in this battle, and they just barely escaped. So it's, I mean, really, we're coming close to the end, because Akalabeth is the other book. So we're on 194 of 255. So we're kind of getting there, and things are not getting good for the elves. Things are just getting continually worse for them.
Right. Yeah, this is pretty bad. A bad point. A low point.
Yeah. It does put perspective. I know we should probably wrap up in a second, but it gives perspective to the elves that we encounter in Lord of the Rings. They're in decline. Like their civilization is like waning at this point. This is like the heights of their power and their glory. And when we encounter like Elrond and Rivendell, that's just like a shadow of the glory that they had at this time.
Yeah, it's amazing.
So,
the other thing I did like, I like the sort of little hat tip towards the future relationship between dwarves and dragons, with the Norgrim fighting what's his face, Glaurung. I thought that was cool.
Yeah, that was a cool moment. They just like pick him up and do their funeral dirge, and they don't even care that there's enemies still around them. They're just
it's so dwarven.
Yeah. And that as a reminder, the Glaurung has no wings, but he crawls, which is interesting.
Yeah. Does he fly? Can he fly?
No.
Does he fly?
No, I don't believe so.
He jumps really high.
He's called the Worm, and I think I read somewhere. I know someone will definitely correct me if I'm wrong, but that he is like not a very evolved dragon. He was like a creation of Morgoth, but wasn't as advanced as future dragons in that regard. Could be wrong, but I seem to remember that.
Mm-hmm. All right, well, let's wrap up there. This is not a fun reading, but it was interesting for sure. And we'll see. Maybe they'll turn it around. Probably not. If you like what you hear, go ahead and rate us 3 Silmarils out of 3. Follow us everywhere at Before the Fellowship. Join the discussion on Discord and send any comments or questions to beforethefellowship@gmail.com. Join us next time as we read the greatest story you've never heard, The Silmarillion by J.R.R. Tolkien.